We're certainly excited to see Patrick and Julie and little Grant this morning, and it's wonderful to know that he's going to have lots of playmates because we have 3 more of our families who are expecting right now, as well as a whole host of others that have shown up in the last few years, and it's just a great blessing. Now, we don't always see them on Sunday because they're hanging out in the nursery or downstairs, and when they cut loose after worship, though, I experience them right out here, so you can, but we want to congratulate Patrick and Julie today. If you have your scriptures and you want to turn with me to the book of Luke, the 2nd chapter, this is one of the 3 or 4 chapters in the scripture that deal with the birth of Jesus. Matthew chapters 1 and 2 and Luke chapters 1 and 2 primarily are those chapters. And in the midst of that story of the birth of Jesus, in verse 7 of this 2nd chapter, these are words that most of us have seen numerous times, read numerous times, again and again, and we're familiar with the story. And so I just want to read the one verse this morning. I'm not going to speak about it extensively, but use it primarily as a foundation for the message this morning. And it simply reads in Luke 2:7, "And she," that is Mary, "gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn." Last year I preached a message on this particular verse, and I made a point of talking about those who had no room for Jesus when he came. You may remember some of it, I don't know. The political higher-ups, the politically ambitious folk had no room for Jesus when he showed up. They weren't ready for someone to become king. That's why it was so important for someone like Herod to make certain that that never happened. The religionists of the day made no room for him. The people who thought of themselves as more godly or more righteous than others, they didn't make any room for this tiny babe. The healthy and wealthy didn't make any room for him. He was from a poor family. He didn't have a place to be born, had to be born in a stable, couldn't afford lodging or whatever, but we didn't have any room for him. The Jewish nation as a whole, even though they knew a Messiah was coming, they had no room for Jesus as we know him. And I'm wondering, as I think about that, if there isn't less room for him now than there was then. When you start surveying our culture, not only here in the States, but when you look around the world, there are folk that just don't have any room for Jesus. And part of the problem is that the reason for this season, as we think of it now, has been hijacked. We talk about this a lot. We talked about it some last week. We'll talk about it more this morning, how this particular season of the year is designed in such a way as to help us remember what God did for us through Jesus. But there's a problem with that in that the season has been hijacked to some extent. And so we keep hearing this question over and over again. We ask it a lot of times to children, what do you want for Christmas? What kind of blessing, what kind of favor do you want for Christmas? What would you like to have? And all of us think about that as the years go by. What would we like to have this year for Christmas? And as I thought about it, I came up with a good answer for all of us, and that is, what about let's have a better understanding of who Jesus is and why he came? Wouldn't that be a nice thing to have for Christmas? Wouldn't it be a nice thing to have a more godly perspective on why it was important for Jesus to come, perhaps more important than anything else? Now, last week, we preached the first sermon on what Christmas is not. We have a second one this morning. And last week we said that Christmas is not a Christian holiday in the same manner or same sense that the Jews had their holidays. This morning I want us to understand that Christmas is not crass commercialism. Christmas is not crass commercialism. And I wonder oftentimes what would happen if Christians began to refuse to participate in this whole aura of the spending and all the fanaticism that is surrounded with this holiday as the world sees it. For you see, crass commercialism, as we see it in our culture, is the antithesis or the opposite of the Christian faith for several reasons, and I want to mention 4 of them this morning. The first one is this. Crass commercialism is built upon a worldly perspective. It's built upon a worldly perspective. The first and the greatest lie of Satan to Adam and Eve is that God is trying to keep something from you. He doesn't want you to have the very best. He doesn't want you to be like know good and evil, because when you know good from evil, you'll be like him. He's trying to keep something from you. You'll be like gods if you get all that's actually coming to you. Satan is saying, Adam and Eve, in your current state, you are being deprived. And I don't want that for you. I don't want you to be deprived. That's kind of what he's saying. And when we see what happens in this arena of commercialism, that's exactly what everyone is telling us. And you're deprived if you don't have this thing. You're not as well off as others if you don't buy this or don't have that. E.B. White, in his book, The Second Tree from the Corner, made this statement. He said, to perceive Christmas through its wrappings becomes more difficult with every year. To see the true meaning of this particular season becomes more difficult every year because there's a whole lot more to filter through and try to see through, isn't there? But the world has a very different perspective of how life is supposed to be. Paul wrote about that in Galatians chapter 5, verses 16 and 17, and here's what he said. So I say, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. For the sinful nature desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the sinful nature. They are in conflict with each other so that you do not do what you want. Now, he's drawing a line here between these two attitudes, these two perspectives, these two spirits of how the world is to be perceived, either from a spiritual perspective or a physical or worldly perspective. And he said, look, the problem is that there's all these desires that come to us, and in the context, he may be writing more about these sexual or immoral desires, but it transcends and it goes beyond just that. To have more, to be more, to want more. And so basically what he's saying here is there's self-indulgence, there's self-pleasure, there's self-gratification, there's self-satisfaction. These are the things on which the world is built primarily. That is the lie that Satan first told the first couple, Adam and Eve. This worldly perspective. But it stands in opposition to the godly perspective. Jesus, when he spoke about this, listen to what he said in Matthew chapter 16, verses 24 through 26. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone would follow after me, he must deny himself. And in that denial process, deny himself all this stuff that everybody thinks they have to have. He must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world, yet forfeits his soul? Or what would a man give in exchange for his soul? If you get it all. You've heard me say this before, but I love that comment by the comedian Stephen Wright back in the 80s or 90s, probably in the 90s. He used to say, you can't have everything. Where would you put it? But some of us try, don't we? We oftentimes try. Jesus said, in opposition to self-indulgence and self-pleasure and self-satisfaction and self-gratification, try self-denial and self-sacrifice. They are much better. But crass commercialism is built on a worldly perspective of having more, isn't it? The second thing is this. Crass commercialism is inclusive in its target, but exclusive in its fulfillment. Now, I have to say that again and explain a little bit to you. So, crass commercialism is inclusive in its target, but exclusive in its fulfillment. Because crass commercialism promises stuff. It promises stuff. And you turn on the television or the radio, and there's always somebody promising us more stuff, isn't there? You need this stuff. You got to have this stuff. But most of this stuff is way beyond our needs, isn't it? And oftentimes it is independent of God's best for us, regardless of what it is. God is choosing to bless us with all kinds of wonderful blessings, but we're often in pursuit of stuff. Jesus made a point of saying in Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 and following, that we need to think about, when we're thinking about our food and our clothes and all those kinds of things, even the very necessities of life get in our way of thinking about what really matters. Jesus said, don't worry about that stuff. God will take care of that stuff. You think about the things that are righteous. Now, the problem with crass commercialism, as it promises stuff, it's always promising stuff to everyone, isn't it? Crass commercialism says everyone can have everything, and everything is good for you. It says you can be anything, you can do anything, you can have anything. We hear it all the time, that you can be anything you want to be. You can do anything you want to do. Folks, that's just not reality. I had several issues of Leadership magazine in my in a former collection. I've given them all away now. But in one of them, I remember there was a cartoon, one frame cartoon in there of a preacher rearing back in his chair in his office, and he was in deep thought. And through his doorway, you could see the church secretary and someone else speaking out in the hallway, perhaps. And he's leaning back, and there's two women, and they're talking, and one of them says, he must really be in deep spiritual thought. And the little balloon that was above the preacher's head as he was sitting there thinking was, I'll probably never be able to dunk a basketball. The things that we want, they're just certain things that we're just not going to have. They're just certain things that aren't going to come our way, and yet we're told every day that, yes, you can have it. You can have anything. And the advertisers tell us that everything is for everyone, but here's the reality. Some people just don't need it. Some of us don't need all the things that they're advertising. I know most of us can't afford everything that they're advertising. And a lot of folks can't manage the things that they are advertising even after they get them. Reality is not everyone needs that stuff and not everyone gets it, but some people get it and it comes with a price, doesn't it? Sin is like that. Anyone can have it, but it comes with a price because it always takes us one step further than we want to go. It always keeps us longer than we want to stay, and it always costs us more than we want to pay. That's what sin does to us. And many folk, when it comes to this kind of idea relative to this commercialism, we all get exasperated by the whole thing. December's generosity turns into January's regrets oftentimes when that bill comes due. You ever had that happen? Oh, I didn't realize I spent that much. I just thought I just planned to buy a few things. I didn't. Wow. And then it sets in, doesn't it? And crass commercialism says everyone is included. Everyone can participate. And where this hits the hardest and worst is with those who have the least, because it extracts from them as they try to climb up to the levels of other folk. And it's just a terrible, terrible disease, if you will, that we experience in our country. Now, I'm not talking about, please understand, we've been incredibly blessed in this country. And God makes all these blessings available to us for us to be able to use for His glory, if we will. But this whole idea that there's more that needs to be had is problematic at best. Let me move on to the third thing. Crass commercialism calls us to serve a master that we have forsaken. That we've forsaken. When we become a Christian, we essentially say, Jesus, I am identifying with and agreeing with what you said in Matthew chapter 16, that I'm taking up my cross. I'm denying myself and taking up my cross and following you. And what happens with some of this stuff, it just drags us right back into it when we're not careful. In 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 and 16, John wrote these words, "Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For everything in the world, the cravings of sinful man, the lusts of his eyes, the boasting of what he has and what he does comes rather from the Father, does not come from the Father, but from the world. And so this whole idea that there's more to be had, if you will, is drawing us right back to a master that we have been trying to break free from for all of our lives. So that's why Jesus would say in Matthew 6:24, no one can serve two masters. You just can't do it. It's impossible. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and, in the King James, it's mammon, stuff, but it's money. You can't have them both. And this is a real struggle that we have in the world. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it, for us to completely surrender the things of the world for the cause of the kingdom. Even those of us who profess to have done so, I often think about people who decide to leave this country where we have so many incredible blessings and go to places where they'll have nothing basically and live for the cause of the kingdom there. It takes a lot of faith as well as a lot of self-denial to do something like that, doesn't it? An incredible amount of self-denial. Unfortunately, the problem is that when we try it here, this commercialism draws us right back into the very thing that we've denounced. We've said, I don't want to have the newest, I don't want to have the best, I don't want to have the different. That's what we say, but yet all those things keep being thrown in front of us, and we have a hard time shedding ourselves of them. Or to see that someone else has them. A number of years ago, when Janice and I had a neighbor, really nice couple. And I thought very much of them, and he was a really good guy, but he was the kind of person that when the new thing came out, he had to be the first one to have it. Now, he didn't make a big deal out of it. He didn't show it to everybody and say, hey, he didn't do that, but he had to have the first new thing whenever it came out. And he was very, very well off. In addition to what he already had himself, he had a relative died and left him a lot of money. He passed away this year at age 62. And as far as when he was in perfect health, had surgery, had a blood clot, killed him. To have the newest and the best and the different. That's kind of where we often are. I did a little research, and I couldn't find all the numbers I'd like to have found to be able to talk about this a little more informed than I am, but the amount of money that gets spent by consumers between Black Friday and Christmas Day is just incredible. I read somewhere that day they thought that we spent about $6 billion. Now, you spend $6 billion here and $6 billion there, and pretty soon it'll run into some real money. Won't take long till it'll be something, you know. I think I saw where in 2016 we spent close to $1 trillion between Black Friday and Christmas Day on stuff. Wow. It calls us to serve a master that we say we've forsaken. And lastly, crass commercialism draws our attention from the one whom we should be celebrating. It does. It does. It's been almost a year ago. It was the 6th of January, and Richard Fuller stood here doing communion meditation. And I don't know if Richard, if you remember what you did back on the 6th of January. I remember it very well. I made a note of it. I was really moved and influenced by what you said that day because I found myself being a victim of the kind of thing he was talking about. He spoke about distractions, the things that keep us from remembering Jesus when we come around the table. And as I thought about that, I thought about it all year long. So it's been in the fore of my mind, and I deliberately inserted it into the sermon because it came at the right time, I thought. But we all have distractions, do we not? Great and small, doesn't matter what they are. great and small. And it seems like that no matter how hard we try, how much effort we put into it, that at this time of the year, the thing that we're supposed to be thinking about and concentrating on and addressing most often is the thing that just seems to get pushed away farther and farther. And that, of course, is Satan's ploy. He wants to refocus our attention onto the things of this world so we'll forget about Jesus and who he is and why he came and what he did while he was here. The great author C.S. Lewis wrote a real delightful and insightful kind of book called Screw Tape Letters. And the book is all about how Satan, or senior demon rather, is training a junior demon in how to tempt people. It's kind of interesting. And in the book, one of the things he says is that what you need to do is, with Christians, you don't need to tell them to forget their Christianity as much as you need to try to incorporate other things into it. Not just Christianity, not just focus on Jesus, but Christianity and this and Christianity and that. And when you can get people to do that, then they're not thinking about Jesus. Satan is all about trying to get us to surrender our attention from Christ and put it on the world. And he's quite good at making that happen. And the commercialization of this season makes this a definite reality. You know, if you're anything like me, every year about the middle of November, I start thinking, now this year I'm really going to focus more on Jesus. I'm not going to focus on stuff. And every year it seems to happen. Within a brief period of time, we've given ourselves over to the merchandisers of all the physical wares. And somehow Jesus gets left out again. I don't know if that's happened to any of us in here this morning, but I know that he works with me, or Satan works on me pretty good with it. But this kind of thing draws our attention from the one we're supposed to be celebrating this season of the year. The year was 1903. The month was December. After many attempts, a couple of guys by the name of Orville and Wilbur, Wright, of course, were successful with their quote-unquote flying machine down on the coast of North Carolina. And once they made that initial flight, they were thrilled and they telegraphed this message to their sister Catherine. We have actually flown 120 feet. We'll be home for Christmas. Now, obviously, they weren't talking about flying home, but it's kind of a neat thing, though, isn't it? And so Catherine hurried to the editor of the newspaper with this news. She thought it would really be something. And so when she handed the newspaper editor this message, he looked at it and said, "How nice, the boys will be home for Christmas." How nice, the boys will be home for Christmas. He totally missed the big news, didn't he? He totally missed the big news that man had actually achieved flight, albeit just 120 feet at the time. I wonder how many times that happens to folks. They see here's the big headline, it's the incredible thing, and they're looking for something else. Or they see something else. Jesus is born. Oh, there's a sale at Belk's. If we're going to think about giving, let's do what Charles Swindoll suggested in his book, Growing Strong, when we talk about giving. Here's what he says. He said, some gifts you can give this Christmas are beyond monetary value. Mend a quarrel. We had a real blessed thing happen in our family in the last month. Some relatives who had been on the outs for some time were able to mend a faction and a quarrel. And the joy that has spread through our family because of that has really been great, because it's been something good that's happened. Mend a quarrel. Dismiss a suspicion. Tell someone, I love you. Give something away anonymously. Forgive someone who has treated you wrong. Turn away wrath with a soft answer. Swindoll has a big list. And the next one, he says, visit someone in a nursing home. Now, I want to pause and make a comment about that. You know, we have some wonderful facilities in this area that are caring for the elderly and infirmed. And I'm in those places frequently. And every time I go in, I see people I'm sure that have very few folk come by to spend any time with them at all. do that. Do that. It'll change your life. Apologize if you were wrong, Swindoll says. Be especially kind to someone with whom you work. Give as God gave to you in Christ, without obligation or announcement or reservation or hypocrisy. I don't know if you're anything like me or not, but I know that no matter how much effort I put into it, every year it seems to get a hold of me that all the things I say I'm going to focus on for several weeks here, the special gift that God sent in the form of His Son Jesus, and it's there for a little while, and then they're just through all the events of this season, it just gets pulled out, and you get drawn right back into all this extra stuff. I hope that doesn't happen to all of us today, this year. I hope we're able to maintain our focus on the real reason for why we're celebrating. And if you're here today and you've never really understood what this season is all about, but maybe you have a better idea of it today and you want to make a decision concerning your own relationship to Jesus, we're going to offer you that opportunity. It's my prayer that every one of us, I think every day, every Sunday when we're here, we get to this point, we all make a decision. The decision is, am I going to live closer to Jesus, or I'm just going to, just tag along because this is the thing to do, or am I just going to forget the whole thing? And we all make that decision weekly, and in many cases we make it daily. But if you have a special decision to make today, it's one that you want to make public, we're going to give you that opportunity. And if you're here today and you need to respond to the love, grace, and mercy of our Lord because of what was done for us in that tiny manger in the city of Bethlehem, we want you to come as we stand and sing.